Hey everyone, welcome back to the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. This week we are doing an interview. I'm interviewing one of my really good friends, Jocelynn. We've actually never met in person, but we've been in contact since 2019. So I'm so excited for you to meet her. She is an experienced educator. She's a speaker. She does professional development for schools. She has such a passion to see the diverse people of our world. One of her main goals is to help teachers be able to use instruction in their classroom that allows children to be seen and to be heard daily through instruction. I know typically when we think of diversity, we think of racial diversity or religious diversity, but there's also so much more that really helps us just engage our students, create information retention, and help them have academic achievement. So with that, let's get into today's episode and let me introduce you to Jocelynn.
Welcome to the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. Whether you're a first-year teacher, veteran teacher, or just a mom trying to gain some new insights, you are right where you are meant to be. Kayla Durkin, founder of the Blossoming Teacher course, is passionate about helping new teachers blossom into the teacher they were born to be. Kayla wants to help inspire teachers to be their best self, whether that means sharing about personal or professional development, self-care, or the latest and most effective teaching strategies. Through this podcast, you will hear from real teachers sharing their stories about teaching, all with one main goal in mind: to be able to make an impact and help other teachers blossom. And with that, here is your host, Kayla Durkin.
Hey Jocelynn, how are you today?
Hey Kayla, I am great. How are you?
Good, thank you. I'm so happy that you're here today. I know that you have so many answers for teachers who just aren't even sure where to begin. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So my name is Jocelynn Hubbard. I am the CEO of Custom Teaching Solutions and the creator of the Culture Center Teacher Training Series, which is a comprehensive professional development and coaching program that allows teachers to successfully navigate and adapt to the cultural differences of the students inside of their class and the different perspectives that are brought in from the world around them, so that all of their students can feel affirmed, welcomed, and celebrated through instruction. I am, of course, an educator first, foremost, and always. And I have the majority of my experience in 7th and 8th grade language arts and social studies. I've taught in a few different states, but I love middle school children. I love middle school students. And then I guess personally, I am a wife and a mom to 5 beautiful children, busy children, but beautiful. And just a fan of books and exercise and conversation.
That is so awesome. So I think all of you should know how Jocelynn mentioned she has 5 children. And although she has 5 children, she still manages to do it all. So if you are not following her on Instagram yet, you can find her at I Teach Custom. And I think you'll just be amazed that all of the things that she is able to do. She pushes herself to exercise. She dances. She was running a 5K. Like she does all of these things. Oh, and keep in mind, she ran that 5K while you were what, 8 months pregnant?
I was 8 months pregnant.
8 months, right? Like she does it all, including having these 5 kids. So she is just an inspiration in all aspects of life, but especially in the classroom, especially for first-year teachers or really any teacher, no matter how much experience you have. If you just aren't really sure how to lay that foundation for having an inclusive classroom, Jocelynn has a lot of resources for you. So I have to ask Jocelynn, for teachers who are like, okay, I know these are things I need to be doing in my classroom, but where do I even begin? What do you say? How do you help them?
Well, I think that even asking the question is the best first step, right? Because sometimes we don't ask the questions, but there are some really great changes that are happening in education. I think about when I was an undergrad, there wasn't even a conversation about creating culture-centered, culturally responsive classrooms and culturally responsive lessons. And now there are so many more education departments that are bringing in specialists and making sure that students have a foundational knowledge of what culturally relevant pedagogy is. And I'm throwing out all these terms, right?
Yeah.
So, but essentially, culturally responsive and culturally relevant pedagogy is all about thinking about the culture of our students. So who are they at their core? What are their traditions, their norms, their beliefs? Who are they? What makes them who they are as a learner in your classroom? And so when you think about that, then you can guide your instruction, right? You can think about the ways in which your students would best engage with material, the best ways that they would engage with their classmates, and some of the resources that you can bring in. So many times teachers are being exposed to this foundational knowledge of culturally relevant pedagogy, and that is phenomenal. Like, I am so excited about this shift because it's so necessary. But honestly, and I know that, well, I can't say I know, but I think you would agree because you have the Blossoming Teacher course and you work so closely with first year teachers that there's a difference between theory and practice, right? There's a difference between theory and application.
Mhm.
So it's one thing to read about all these things and to kind of know about them, and even to do your student teaching and to work through some of these things in your student teaching. But when you get your own classroom, it's a whole other world. I mean, you're not working alongside your mentor teacher anymore like that. So there can be many more questions. And I think a great starting place for first year teachers is with 3 anchor questions. So whenever I'm designing lessons, I ask myself these 3 questions. Whenever I'm working with teachers, I have them to write these 3 questions down and ask them. It's the first is, what are your students learning about themselves? And that is not just like, oh, I like the color purple, right? No, we want to go deeper. So when you're teaching this lesson, what are your students learning about themselves that's going to carry into the future? Like, what is the lesson that transcends the curriculum? Are they learning about their ability to persevere through a really tough subject matter, topic, set of math problems? What are they learning about themselves and their character and their thinking? The second question is, what are my students learning about their peers? So students should always be engaging in classroom discussion, no matter what the grade level or the subject area. They should be engaging in conversation with their classmates, discussion. They should be learning how to listen to what their peers are saying and figure out how what their classmates or their peers are thinking is similar or different from what they're saying, right? So being able to identify different perspectives, diverse perspectives, and even if they don't agree with it, then they still can learn to respect those differences. And maybe they don't understand it, so they learn how to ask questions of people with a different or a diverse perspective. And then the third question is, what are my students learning about the world around me? So every single thing that we teach needs to be connected to a greater why. Students ask, like, well, why do we have to do this? Why am I here? And so many times I think teachers just kind of brush it off, and it's like, well, because you have to learn this material. Why? I want to see in the real world, real life application, why do I need to learn this? Why is this important to me? How is this going to help me to impact the future, to impact the next generation, to build whatever goals and dreams that I have? And again, that starts from preschool all the way up to high school, asking those 3 questions. What are my students learning about themselves? What are my students learning about their peers? What are my students learning about the world around them?
And I think the best part about these 3 questions, honestly, is the fact that, all of our schools have mission and vision statements, and the end goal for education is to help these young adults function in society, right? And so these questions, they're not just reflective practices that they're going to use right then and there in your 3rd grade classroom or whatever it is, but these questions are going to help them continue to be able to reflect on the environment that surrounds them, no matter what setting they're in, whether it's situations that they're going through in high school with a lot of peer pressure, when they get into college, when they're interviewing for jobs. Like, these are going to make these students lifelong learners and be able to reflect on really what is going on around them.
Exactly. That's the key. So again, just like another piece of what it is that I do when I'm working with teachers is that whole reflection piece. And many times I think I don't know if we want to, or we think it's supposed to be this way, or I don't know, but many times like we'll do some reflection and then it's like, okay, good, I reflected on that, now I'm done. but that's not how life should work, because for myself personally, every single day I'm growing as a person. And
Mhm.
so when I do some reflection today, it's going to look a little bit different from the reflection that I did yesterday and the day before that. The same thing as educators. I have been in education for 16 years. And I've taught in 3 different states, and then I've worked with teachers in way more states than that. All of the experience that I have every single year, as I'm growing and changing as a person, my philosophy of education changes and my depth of knowledge changes. And even becoming a mother has impacted the way that I view my students in the classroom and the way that I design lessons and all of that. So reflection is so huge, and teaching our students how to be able to reflect on their thinking and their learning is critically important.
Absolutely. So let's get into some examples, Jocelyn. I know you said we want to take their traditions and their personal beliefs into consideration when we're planning lessons. And so I know you have a really good story about your dad. Would you mind sharing that a little bit?
Absolutely. And it's funny too, because my dad listens to any podcast that I'm on. So he's always like, oh, thanks, Joss. But so with my dad, he was raised as a Jehovah Witness. And many people are not necessarily that familiar with that denomination of Christianity, right? That arm of Christianity. So Jehovah Witnesses do not celebrate holidays like Christmas, and they believe in, you know, Jesus and God, but they don't necessarily think that there needs to be Christmas trees and lights. There's not a celebration of like, or an emphasis on birthdays and Mother's Day and Father's Day. And so this is not right or wrong, right? This is their belief. And there are some really great reasons why they believe these things, right? They don't want to take a focus off of the Savior and that focus to think about celebrating ourselves or things in the world. So when I was talking with my dad, because I just asked him, I was like, well, was it weird for you growing up? Because he went to a public high school, public middle school, public elementary school, and there were always these celebrations. Teachers would put up Christmas lights and Christmas trees in the classroom. And obviously now there's elves on the shelf, and there's, Christmas tree erasers and Santa Claus. And he was like, yeah, I mean, it was definitely weird at first, because I knew that that's not something that I would like find valuable, or that I was going to participate in. But my teachers didn't even realize that. Like, they never asked those questions about, does everybody celebrate Christmas in the class? Does everybody actually celebrate their mothers in this way? Do you want to have a Mother's Day card? And it really got me thinking, like, wow, how uncomfortable are some students feeling, but they're too shy. They're too not embarrassed of their faith, right? But just embarrassed, like, what are the other kids going to say about me? Or how am I going to be perceived? Is someone going to tease me because I don't celebrate the same way that everyone else does?
Yeah. And I think that's something that we forget, especially with Jehovah Witnesses. Yeah, they're Christian, but they are still not celebrating Christmas the same way. But at the same time, I also think your story about the Mother's Day cards is huge. We just assume everyone would want to celebrate their mother in whatever capacity, whether it's a mom, an aunt, a sister, whoever we are thinking about on that holiday. We don't even realize that there are cultures who they aren't, or religions that they aren't celebrating. And so the fact that we are expecting them to make this Mother's Day card, how uncomfortable are we making our students in our classroom?
Well, and I think that's the other thing, is thinking about the word celebration. People define celebration in completely different ways.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that my father didn't celebrate his mother, because I saw him celebrate his mother. I saw him celebrate his father. I saw him celebrate my mother.
Mm-hmm.
But he did it in different ways. It was like, I'm not going to just do it on this, celebrate this person on this particular day. The way that I celebrate them is through respect. The way that I celebrate them is through quality time. I'll send you flowers on a day. It doesn't have to be Mother's Day. It's like, I was thinking of you, I'm sending you flowers, right?
Yeah.
So I think redefining the way that we think about celebration and the way that we think about celebrating people or places or events, just like with birthdays. all of my children are being raised by the same parents in the same house, the same religious beliefs, all of that stuff. But because of their personalities, they don't all like to be celebrated the same way. Like one of my kids, he does not want you to make a fuss of him. Please do not sing happy birthday super loud. I don't want a bunch of people at the house. He just doesn't want it. And I respect that, but I didn't even realize it at first. Like it took some time to get to see who he was and say, okay, I can celebrate this child this way and I can celebrate this child that way, you know? So as educators in the classroom, I think it goes beyond even just thinking about religious practices and beliefs, right? It goes to the core of who people are and how they're being raised and the values and the things that their parents or their guardians, their loved ones are putting emphasis on.
Definitely. And so thinking of those celebrations, I kind of want to move into a little bit harder conversation. And so there's a lot of ethnicities that we maybe don't do as good of a job celebrating or having those conversations in the classroom. So I reached out to Jocelynn about having these hard conversations. And so Jocelynn, when teachers are uncomfortable, when they're not sure where to even begin, especially when it comes to Black History Month or whatever they're celebrating or thinking about in their classroom, how can you help these teachers?
So yes, I mean, this is definitely a common question that I get, especially because of the type of training and professional development that I facilitate. And once again, I'll go back to our definitions around certain terms. So typically when we think about culture or when we think about diversity, we always think about race and ethnicity and religion. Like those are the top three things. If you put out a survey, people are going to check those things. And they are a huge part of those two terms, but there's so much more when we start to think about diversity, right? Not just racial diversity, excuse me. And I agree with you. I think that there are so many perspectives that we don't even bring to the table just because we don't necessarily consider them to be in the diversity box. Like, so, I mean, so many teachers that I work with, they'll message me, they're like, I don't know where to start because my class is not that diverse. And I'm like, okay, so we have to be very specific, racial diversity, right? But then even thinking about that, sometimes you don't even know the racial makeup of your students because students physically appear different ways. There are a number of students that are Native American in my children's classes that if you were to just look at them and put them in a picture, most people would point to them and say that person is white. But when you talk to them, when you talk to their parents, they're like, no, we're not. We are Native American. We belong to this particular tribe. So having those conversations, right? And I lead a workshop on that about having complex conversations in the classroom. I have a strength method that I recommend that teachers work through. And basically it allows them to think first about how they feel about the topic, right? Because I'm always going to go back to reflection first. Like one of my favorite phrases is that the word impact begins with I. So we have to start with ourselves and thinking about the ways that we view a particular topic, subject, how do we feel about it, right? Because if we're uncomfortable with it, that's going to reflect in the lesson. If we're unsure, our students are going to sense that, they're going to feel that, they're going to feel uncomfortable and not really sure that they can share their true feelings about a particular topic. So I definitely always say, like I said, so I have a strength method that I recommend teachers work through, and so for S, it's self-reflection. So think about yourself, and then T is for triggers. What are some things when you are thinking about this particular topic that could be triggers for students, for yourself? So if I'm reading a book and the mother dies in the book, that might be a trigger for me because I watched my own mother die, and now how am I going to be dealing with that as a classroom teacher, right? I have to deal with that first before I bring that to the class, and then I'm breaking down in front of my students. And then R is to do research. So what research do you need to do before you present this lesson? if we're talking about Black History Month in particular, again, I would always encourage teachers to think about the layers of any particular subject. So many times when we're studying Black History Month, we think about people like Martin Luther King and Harriet Tubman, and I don't know, there are like a few other buzz names, that Rosa Parks, right? And those people are incredible, huge, and we need to study them. But when you're in a vertical alignment meeting and in first, second, and third grade, everyone's talking about Martin Luther King, Rosa Parks, and Harriet Tubman, I think we're good there. I think we can go ahead and shift the conversation and talk about a few other people that are influential in the Black community today and in the past. So doing research to find out what is it that I need to know and understand about this topic before I move forward. Then the next is expression. So thinking about the ways that you want to deliver and express, your knowledge base, because you definitely want to try to separate your feelings, because your students are going to have enough feelings, right? So you need to separate your feelings out from what it is that you are presenting. You need to be presenting the truth and the facts, but understand that you do have feelings and they are real. So how am I going to express these things in a way that is factual and that is truthful? And then also thinking about what things your students might want to express, so that you can try to plan ahead, because we all know there's those 2, 3, 4 kids and they just say, oh, I didn't plan for that. Let me go back. And then N is for news resources or news sources. So what resources can I bring into the classroom that are primary sources, that are, documents, that are hard facts, so the students can actually see some of the research that I've done. G is, grounding your lesson in the facts and beginning with common definitions. And then T is teaching from a place of truth and bringing in those perspectives. And then H is honoring the history of the topic and teaching it in a very honest way and with humility, because as a person that is teaching about a group that you are not a part of, you have to really be very sensitive to that, and thinking that there may be students in your classroom that are a part of that group, and you never want to marginalize them. You never want to be talking about slavery and say, well, yeah, it'd be like if, this white child over here owned this Black child, which, trust me, that has happened in class, because my nieces and nephews have told me that, oh my gosh, I felt really bad in this class because the teacher said this. And the teacher was a great teacher, well-meaning, but sometimes we just say things and we don't think about it. So working through that strength method really allows teachers to walk step by step through how to approach this complex conversation and a topic that can be a little bit more weighty for themselves and their students.
And I think a big piece there is, you mentioned it through multiple letters of that acronym, but the factual piece and keeping your opinion out of it. I feel like oftentimes teachers are really uncomfortable because they're so worried, well, what are people going to think of me if I say this? Well, if you're only saying facts, you don't have to worry about what they think of you, because you're staying factual. Students shouldn't know. I mean, I know we all have different opinions, but, and Jocelynn, this is something we've talked about too, students shouldn't know what side you are on for, whether you're a Republican, a Democrat, a Libertarian, whatever it is. Students shouldn't know that about you, because you're always sticking to facts. And so I like how you focus on that throughout that acronym as well. But then also another conversation we've had is, and I know teachers have heard this before, but am I doing it this way because this is the way it's always been done? Or am I doing it this way because it's what's best for my students? Am I teaching Martin Luther King because that's what I learned about in school, and I feel like that's what my students should learn about too? Or am I teaching about other people throughout history because they've already learned enough about, not that they've learned enough about them, I guess I should say, but because there's other people that are important to learn about as well.
Exactly that, and I can't remember the name of, it's Admiral something. I wish I could remember her name right now, but maybe you can look her up and put her quote in the show notes or something. But she said the most dangerous phrase in the language is, because we've always done it this way, or something to that effect. And that is so true. Like I said earlier, if we would sit down and do some vertical alignment meetings and just have some conversations with the teachers in some of the other grade levels, but honestly, even across our own grade level.
Mhm.
Sometimes people right next door to you are teaching almost the exact same lesson because it's quote unquote Hispanic Heritage Month, because it's Black History Month, because it's Women's History Month, and no one is branching outside. So it's like, if we could sit down and say, let's map this out.
Right.
Let's map this out and let's see across our grade level, how do we want to spread the knowledge? How do we want to share the wealth of information that is out there so that every single time our students go into a classroom, they see that we're all talking about this very important topic, but we're not all talking about the very same person, because then the students are going to start to check out.
Mhm.
And then as well, the vertical alignment saying, okay, well, in kindergarten, we talked about these people and we talked about these particular topics. Now, that's not to say that you can't talk about the same people, but you know what? You need to level up that conversation. Because the conversation that you have about Martin Luther King with kindergartners should absolutely not be the same conversation you're having with them with eighth graders.
Right.
Eighth graders they are getting ready to go to high school, and they are, on a whole other level. So we need to really start to bring the conversation to where our students are intellectually and socially and all of that. And then just thinking about what it is that our students need. So you were talking about how there is a large Native American, Indigenous people group living in North Dakota where you live. So the very first school that I taught, well, when I moved out of Ohio, so I grew up in Ohio, moved to North Carolina. And when I moved to North Carolina, I taught in a small town called Red Springs. There is a large population of Lumbee Native Americans. And when I was working with my students, dynamic and phenomenal, so intelligent. But when I asked them, hey, who are some of your heroes, like locally in your community, that you can identify? And then who are some people that you can identify that are maybe famous or more well known, that are also Native American, that are also Black American, as I was asking the whole class. And so many of my Native American students they pulled me to the side and they're like, Miss, I don't know anybody that's like famous that's Native American, because we only ever talk about Native Americans during Thanksgiving, and we only ever talk about Native Americans during the colonization. So we hear about them from the perspective of the colonizer. We hear about them from the perspective of, I don't know, this mythical Thanksgiving feast that everyone wants to talk about. And so that doesn't help to build up their self-efficacy. Like, it doesn't help them to believe that there are people, that look like them, that identify in some of the same ways. And I'm not saying that they don't think that they can't reach goals, because they absolutely can, right? How many times do we say, you know what, because I don't see anybody sitting in that space, I'm going to go after it, right? But it's also really nice to also see that there are some people that are just like you, that have done some amazing things, because there are. It's not like mathematics was something that only people in Greece did.
Yep.
There were people that were in Africa and South America and all these other continents that were building things, that were creating things.
Mhm.
Let's find out about those people and let's share that information with our students. Let's share.
Absolutely. And so obviously it's not happening today, but this is something that Jocelynn and I plan on talking about on her podcast someday too. But how can you bring this into all of the subjects that you teach? It's not just history. It's not just social studies. These are conversations that you should be having throughout all of your classes with all of your students.
I think that one of the best ways to bring this into every classroom, at least to begin with, is with those 3 anchor questions, and to ask yourself the power question, why? It's such a powerful question. Why am I teaching this? Why do my students need to know this? How am I connecting it to the real world and real things? If students don't see themselves in the curriculum, if they don't see the purpose, they are going to check out. I think about my own life growing up in education. I did have some really great teachers, and I'm thankful for them, because they are some of the people that inspired me to want to be an educator. But I also had so many teachers that, oh my gosh, you would walk into the classroom and it was like, this is the book we're reading, and we read the book and that was it. And as an adult, and then as an English teacher, I went back and I reread some of those books, and I'm like, there is so much that they could have brought into this conversation
Yes. Yep.
when I was in this grade back in 1997, 6 or whatever, that they never brought in to help me to understand why does this matter now? If I'm reading Animal Farm, why do I care today?
hmm When we think about those check boxes that you mentioned earlier, when you asked, if you're having teachers identify what is included in diversity, what are some of those typical check boxes that we don't think about?
So typical things that we don't think about. Well, I think there is, as of late, there's been a lot more emphasis on this, but like neurodiversity and thinking about the ways in which students learn. So just like I was talking about with my own children, they learn in very different ways and they receive information in very different ways. They have different learning styles. That's all diversity, the ways in which we're being raised. So my students that I taught in Red Springs, although some of them were Black American, they would often tell me, "You're different, miss. You're different." And I was, because I grew up in Ohio and I lived in New York and my family was from New York. So the stories that I heard and the food that I ate and the way that I engaged in conversation, different, diverse, so much different than them. I mean, there were literally phrases that they would say and I'd be like, "I don't know what you're saying. Oh my gosh, I don't know." I wouldn't say this to them, but I'd be thinking in my mind, I'm gonna have to ask them to repeat this because of their accent, right? That there's diversity in that. So there's regional diversity. And then thinking about one of the things we just talked about earlier, diversity of celebrations and traditions. Like many of us will celebrate graduations, but we celebrate them in different ways. And what does that look like? Or the household. Do we have two moms, two dads, a mom and a dad? Are we living with grandma, grandpa, uncle, aunt, big brother or sister, cousin? So all of this stuff falls underneath diversity. And just like for an educator, just because you might identify as a white female, and then the teacher right next to you identifies as a white female, and the teacher right next to her identifies as a white female, if you were all to sit down and actually start to pull out all the pieces of who you are, you'd be like, but we're not the same. So I can't line up all the white female teachers and say, well, I'm going to give you all the exact same professional development because, this is exactly what everyone needs. But wait a minute, but can you also, and then and everyone's asking questions and saying, but I'm not the same. I'm diverse.
Yeah. So I think that's really important. So can you just reiterate those 3 questions one last time that you go back to again and again?
Again and again. The 3 anchor questions are, what are my students learning about themselves? What are my students learning about their peers? What are my students learning about the world around them?
Yeah. And so as teachers are reflecting on this practice, Jocelynn, do you have any last minute words of wisdom that you would like to share with them before we go today?
Absolutely. I think that you can do this. There is this beautiful woven tapestry of experiences and strategies and curriculum and resources that come together in a way that allows your students to be more engaged, for them to experience success in a way that they probably never have before when you use culturally relevant pedagogy. And like I said, I've thrown that term out a number of times, and I would definitely encourage you. I'm not the person that came up with this term or whatever. I just have done a lot of research. I've seen the benefits. So definitely continue to do research. Look up Dr. Gloria Ladson-Billings, look up Dr. Geneva Gay, look up Zaretta Hammond, look up Goldie Muhammad. There are some amazing scholars in this area that have done phenomenal work where you can learn a ton about these terms. But again, right, there's this difference between theory and practice and application. And so continue to ask yourself the power question, why? And then ask yourself, how? How am I going to get from my why to my how?
And so for these teachers, if they're just looking for a little bit more, do you have a book they could start with, or a podcast they could start with, somewhere that they don't have to go out and do a ton of work yet because they're not ready? They're looking for something.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have a blog, so they can definitely hop on over to my blog, customteachingsolutions.com, and then click on blog. I have a ton of blog posts that I've written about this subject. I also have a free resource, and it is the Culture-Centered Classroom Success Kit. It is literally the best way to get started because I've got some resources to help you look at your classroom library and think about how is it already diverse and what other things do I need to bring in. I've got resources in there to help you look at your lesson plans. My 3 anchor questions are in there. So you can also go over to my website, customteachingsolutions.com/success-kit to grab that today.
Perfect. And then if they want to start following you on Instagram and getting in on some of your real life, where can they find you?
They can find me at I Teach Custom.
Perfect. Well, Jocelynn, thank you so much. I firmly believe that this episode is going to be a great starting place for many teachers who just really aren't sure where to begin. So thank you so much for sharing a little bit of what you know with them and just for being a voice that is there to share things that some people are uncomfortable talking about and some people just aren't really ready yet to talk about. So thank you for being you and thank you for doing this because I know your work is really important.
Thank you, Kayla. You're the best. Thanks for having me on the show today.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the North Dakota Teaching Podcast. If you're enjoying the show, please feel free to rate, subscribe, and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. We really appreciate that effort. Be sure to tune in to the next episode for more teaching tips to make an impact. Until next time.